The Knowledge Valorisation platform connects players in Europe with ambition.
Hello there! Do you also find that the research results are slow to reach the market? Should benefit citizens better? Should we turn into more solutions to tackle climate change and other challenges? The EU Knowledge Valorisation platform is there to change that. Have a look and exchange with like-minded people across Europe to make it happen. Share your best example of a valorization practice and get visibility. Be inspired by what others are doing. Join a community to tackle specific issues. Find advice and guidelines. Take part in workshops and events like the EU Knowledge Valorisation Week. Keep up with latest developments and background studies. There is much for you to discover on the EU Knowledge Valorisation platform. Join us!
Good morning, everybody. Welcome back to the second session of the last day, the training day of the Knowledge Valorisation Week here in Brussels. My name is Jörg Scherer. I'm the coordinator of the European IP Help Desk, and I'm very happy that I will take on what has already been started today with my colleague from the European Patent Office, talking about patents, presenting a very interesting case about how to use patent information for business and patent filing for business development. So and then before we go with the last speaker, more in the world of design rights and trademarks. So I have the pleasure to introduce IP management related to knowledge valorization collaboration projects. Because actually this is what I'm talking about and this is what I'm doing in practice. The European IP Help Desk is in particular also supporting many European beneficiaries when being involved in European-funded collaborative projects. But today it's not only focusing on Horizon 2020 or Horizon Europe projects. It's more looking at intellectual assets generated in collaborative research and innovation environments and hopefully also exploited further to the use of society, the benefit of societal aspects, but also of the European economy. So the agenda of this talk is just going back to look into the question, why is IP really important for research, for innovation, for business perspectives? Looking at good practices and recommendations for IP and knowledge valorization strategies in the framework of R&I collaborations. And then, of course, also I would like to give you more information about other additional initiatives in the field, which also might answer to some questions coming up after this talk. Referring to questions, you know, there's always the chance for you to ask questions using Slido, and I'm trying to answer them in between, but also if you have questions rather at the end of the presentation, so I'm also happy to take on them, and then hopefully they will be answered. But nevertheless, you know, even in case we are not able to answer concrete question today, there is a chance really to reach out to colleagues and to get an answer through the different advisory services. So why is IP important? I mean, there are many student studies in place which really shows that, for example, 45% of the total economic activities in the European Union can be attributed to IP and IPR intensive industries. It also shows that companies having IP rights have, in average, 20% higher revenue compared to other companies which do not have IP rights. So here you see already there's clear evidence that managing intellectual assets using IP for further business development is definitely the key to success in order to be part of a prosperity European Union. And that's the reason also that the European Commission took some efforts to develop, or let's say modernize, an existing code of practice on the management of intellectual assets. So I'm very happy that this has been recently published, and I think it was 2 days ago in one of the talks through the Knowledge Valorisation Week. Also, we learned a lot of insights in a discussion between Peter Trull and Spela Stres, my colleague from Slovenia, or Imelda Lapkin from Enterprise Island. And of course, all over Europe, this very important code of practice will highlight again what are the benefits of managing IP and managing intellectual assets in order really to help us not only in times of crisis, but also all over in order to use knowledge assets for businesses and societal benefits. I mean, talking about intellectual assets, it's for sure that this is definitely a key to accelerate the uptake of innovative solutions, develop new technologies, and it's also the key to answer current challenges related to digital innovation and the Green Deal innovation aspects as well. Actually, the idea is really, and this is the strategic part of intellectual asset management, is really to build a portfolio of valuable intellectual assets or knowledge assets that can be strategically managed for across different ways or value creation paths. So actually, and this is in particular important when it comes to intellectual assets created in the framework of collaborations. Because the people, or let's say the actors involved in those collaborations, usually have different ideas about how to use the results and how to exploit the results. And there is definitely a need in order to develop or agree on joint strategies in order to have win-win situations and to develop mutually agreed benefit out or impact out of the projects. How to use IP for value creation? I mean, there are many, many good reasons to use IP and examples to use IP for value creation. I mean, ownership and exclusivity, of course, is important, not in every kind of environment. And we will learn about that. It stands not against also the principles of open science, open research, open innovation. It's really important to know about who's the owner and how are owner rights designed in order to understand how can I share it, to whom can I share my knowledge. So sharing and ownership are actually partners following the same goals and common objectives. But of course, we'll learn about that also. You already learned it from the colleague from the EPO and even more now or later on from the colleague from EU IPO. Of course, having IP rights, being the owner of IP also gives you, for example, the chance to enhance reputation through patents or trademarks. It is the basis for commercialization, to talk to investors. I mean, that has definitely been a big issue, in particular when intellectual assets have been generated in the framework of collaborations, that potential investors like VCs or seed capital firms, they want to know about the ownership regime and about the IP setting. And if you do not have a clear, robust setting here, then it's very difficult really to get investors on board in order to get further access to finance, which is usually needed after an R&I collaboration comes to an end, because usually technologies are still developed at an earlier stage, so there is a need to involve further stakeholders, further investors in order to get it closer to market. And of course, knowing about IP, knowing about, let's say, the knowledge you bring into the collaboration is the basis to start a collaboration in order to really develop sustainable collaborations. Because when you design, let's say, a new project together with partners, you want to know what is the knowledge you bring into it, and then we can leverage from that, developing new knowledge during the project. And at the end, it's a package. It's a package of background knowledge. It's a package of new knowledge created in the project. Which then will be, let's say, designed in a way that it is then to be brought into further go-to-market strategies. So this is definitely, let's say, a good rationale and a good narrative really to see why IP management is a crucial part in any R&I collaboration. And what we learn, and from many experiences working in the European IP Help Desk, I'm working there since more or less 15 years, as in particular in our helpline services, always we see, but also in the training events, we learn that people still are a little bit, let's say, not aware of the point, what is the difference between intellectual property and intellectual property right? So I'm very happy that also here the code of practice gives a clear explanation on that, so that intellectual assets are not limited to IP rights. Really, they include any results, any data, any products generated, for example, in a collaborative R&I project. So it's really about knowledge assets and the legal form. And of course, this is also important that there is a chance to get a legal right on the IP. This is then the IP right. But we talk mostly about IP management strategies, which then, of course, include protected IP, because that gives you another, let's say, wave and another, let's say, also dimension of value creating for intellectual assets. It's the both sides. It's a defensive position, so really you can secure market shares, you can create others barriers to others to get in competition with your IP. But also it has a very offensive part, really, to get access to investors, to generate new revenues, to enhance your corporate value, to get into new fields of business, to extend your business activities to different territories, and so on and so on. So we really see that IP has a lot of strengths, but of course it has to be understood that it needs to be managed. So that's why we focus also today also on different opportunities to develop strategies for IP protection, for example, through patents. But it's not just only the protection. The protection is one part of the whole management circle. So, and even having IP protected, also it means that it needs also to be enforced, and also it needs to be maintained. So it's like in a garden. It's not planting just and then everything is done. There is much more to be done. Also having IP, building up portfolios of IP, managing them, and of course it's also costly, so that it also needs to be done closely linked to a good strategy. It's not just applying for IP protection for the sake of having a patent or having IP protected. Of course, it should also be always underlined by clear commercial interests or by a clear strategy how to do it and why to do it. And there are actually, in the framework of R&I collaborations, actually, it's always important really to know about, to develop a little bit of strategic intelligence. It's not just, okay, it should not only be technology driven. If there is an availability, a chance from the technological point of view to apply for a patent, I mean, this is a prerequisite. But of course, you need to know about how would the patent actually increase the impact, increase my chances, my opportunities for further commercial activities, or for other kind of licensing as well, for example, also for social impact licensing as well. I mean, it's up to you to define the purpose of your licensing process. But of course, you need to have a robust IP strategy and portfolio to build on licensing strategies. And of course, you have to decide, are the costs higher? Are the benefits higher than the costs? Of course, this is a very important aspect. So when you plan an IP strategy for a new market, of course, you have to know a lot about actually and I will show later in one of the slides also what we called knowledge valorization intelligence mapping. And here you will find all the components you have to consider when you go into a new market. So that was one of the questions we received here through Slido, and of course we will get back to that in a minute, actually. So looking at the narrative of collaborative innovation, actually they offer a lot of opportunities, and you know that in particular for startups, for SMEs, but also for researchers, for innovators, of course, entering into a collaboration gives a lot of chances and opportunities to leverage knowledge through, let's say, a cooperative environment or an open innovation environment. You can learn from the knowledge of others. You can leverage your own knowledge brought into the collaboration that others can help you to identify, let's say, new ways of exploitation, new markets, new business opportunities through licensing and so on. Of course, so it's a platform for exchange of knowledge, exchange of assets, and of course creating jointly new assets as well. So and of course starting a collaboration definitely will also have many questions at the beginning, because you might not be aware of exactly what is the value brought into the collaboration. So what are the expectations from my partner? And of course, that kind of needs and benefits matrix, what are, let's say, potential expectations, how can I meet them, what is the level of collaboration with the different partners in the joint project. Those are questions which, of course, should be met before you start, but usually they will develop further over the lifetime of a project. And you have really to listen and to understand. So what might be really the benefit of collaborating with them? How can I, let's say, leverage from their knowledge? What are the synergies? What are joint goals in order to enter into, let's say, sharing of IP and developing joint exploitation plans for our jointly owned or, let's say, IP portfolio? And this is, of course, particularly challenging, interesting, but of course, in particular for smaller businesses, it could also be seen as a risk, because bringing IP from a previous collaboration or from some, let's say, own research work done at the company into a collaboration, you might also fear a risk that there are the big ones, you take something away, or your IP is mixed with others, and at the end, there is an unclear setting of ownership issues and so on. So that's why really there are chances, but of course, as mentioned before, this needs to be managed. And there is a related question to that. For example, if you bring IP and know-how, any kind of intellectual asset to a new collaboration, how should that be secured? And of course, an NDA is a starting point, but this is not the end point. At the end, also, you need more robust legal settings for that. Usually, of course, you have collaboration agreements. You can add, let's say, additional consortium agreements. We see that, for example, in the field of Horizon Europe. There is the grant agreement, which lays a basis for IP rules, how to get to provide access to your knowledge, how to exploit knowledge. But it should be added by consortium agreements, or later also by joint ownership agreements, or other further agreements like licensing agreements. So there is a set of tools or agreements in place which can help you really to robust and a secure basis for collaboration. And of course, there is plenty of room also to make very individual let's say, settings. I mean, an idea, for example, if you bring an idea to a partner organization, but of course you do not want really there's no chance actually to develop that further into, let's say, a patentable technology. But of course, sharing an idea has a value. It's an intellectual asset. And you can, of course, starting with an NDA, also negotiate some specific conditions on how you get access to your idea. Usually, I would always recommend that you should not really step out by just selling an idea, but really being still at the table in helping out with additional know-how, developing further know-how, because of course that will give you also a better position later when it is about negotiation. Let's say the kind of compensation you get from partner organizations when sharing ideas, or developing open, let's say, open value creation networks, so that you generate jointly incomes from selling the idea and related technology outputs or creative outputs to a potential client. So we see about the opportunities really to leverage IP through collaborative co-design process and so on. We see that also now actually more recognition has been paid that open innovation circles, networks are really good ways for economic gains, and I think it's well covered also, has been well addressed also in the new code of practice for the management of intellectual assets. So it's really that this code is really covering the whole field, the broader range of any kind of intellectual assets, and how to really make further investments on them. And of course, bringing research into impact, of course, it's not just about IP management, IP protection. It is also closely related to dissemination aspects, so really like scientific publications, or to communicate and marketing results to the broader public. And so it's really what we call the so-called, let's say, the horizontal activities. So you have the vertical chain, of technology development, but it also should be added really by this horizontal activities. Really, these are also part of the whole impact creation pathway. And owning IP, assessing IP, protecting IP are definitive, very complex questions in collaborative R&I projects. First question is, what is the majority of your technology? I mean, we talk about R&I collaborations also addressing different levels of technology readiness level. So, you know, there is this readiness level from 1 to 9, and many R&I collaborations maybe are getting up to the point of the proof of concept, which is their L3 to 4. But of course, others are starting later. And of course, IP management, or let's say the elements and the intensity and also the importance of IP management definitely also relates to the technology readiness level. Of course, I mean, there are different IP management practices more important when you already have a prototype and you would like to bring that, of course, closer to market, or you have an early stage R&I collaboration, let's say a basic science based on basic science. Of course, there are different questions which needs to be managed. And of course, looking at opportunities also, and this is good to know also for many for example, collaborations also in the framework of European funded projects, that the use of results should not be limited and is not limited really to commercial use. It can be a broader field of different applications for, let's say, usually what we see is also there is a diversity of activities. The academic partners, of course, wanted to make use of the results for further teaching, for further research, for scientific publications. Results can also be entered into policy roadmaps or used for educational policies and so on. But of course, also results might be turned into innovation to be used for economic activities. And then, of course, again, we get back to the question of the results usually are a package combining different intellectual assets developed or brought into the collaboration by the different partners. So that it is quite obvious that in many cases, we talk about also joint ownership situations, so that there is definitely need to define the relative contributions of the partners. So then you need to agree on the level of ownership. And so I'm happy to see also, for example, now in Horizon Europe, this is covered by a so-called results ownership list, which is definitely part of the final report. And this is a good practice, not only for the European funded projects. We always recommend that also for any R&I collaboration, that you are very clear from the beginning. What is the IP you bring into the collaboration, and what is the IP generated during the R&I collaboration, and then really to make a clear setting and a robust, let's say, overview about, okay, what is the status of ownership of all the intellectual assets which are really available at the end of the project. And this is, of course, something to be discussed among the scientists in the projects and, let's say, the technology developers from the companies as well. But of course, at the end, it should also be confirmed and consolidated by legal staff. So you please make sure that also the TTOs, the RTOs at the academic institutions, the research organizations, or the legal departments at the enterprises are also involved in order to confirm this list of assets, so that there is no discussion about that. Because if you don't do it, the discussion will definitely go on, and they might even completely block the exploitation potential of the results. And at the end, of course, no exploitation will happen. So that's a high risk. So this is why the management of the joint ownership is really crucial. And then, of course, the project is running definitely for a couple of years. So the average duration of an R&I collaboration, let's say, might be 3, 4, 5 years. Maybe it includes clinical studies. It goes up to 6, whatever. However, there is an end. And of course, now you have to be sure that all the agreements you made during the lifetime of the project are ending with the project. For example, usually the access rights, which means the setting to share IP, the intellectual assets among the participants in a collaborative project, usually they are limited up to 1 year after the end of the project. So make sure at the end of the project that you enter into additional agreements, licensing agreements, joint ownership management agreements, which gives you a clear, robust setting that you can use the results beyond the project duration. And of course, in that kind of joint ownership management agreements also you have to define not only, let's say, the list of inventors and the ownership situation, but also, of course, what are joint strategies to use the results further, to whom to share, and who is the main innovator, the driver of the innovation. Or did you think about maybe, let's say, starting a new venture, a new company, and you pool all the IP into that legal setting, and then it's much clearer also that the IP is pulled up and can then also be used for further exploitation. So I mean, this is definitely good practice also what we see from larger collaborations where you have a very, let's say, fragmented situation of ownership, that many partners contributed to the intellectual assets and they are pooled together, and then be sure that you have a clear regime and a clear management, also governance structure in place, so that, for example, would be an idea that if you pool all the information from your project and, for example, in the field of, again, here back to, for example, Horizon Europe, and you do not have somebody who is still at the moment interested in licensing your technology or taking up your technology, then exactly for that purpose also there is the chance to make use of the Horizon Results platform, that you put this, let's say, the set of intellectual assets on that platform, defining the ownership level, maybe also arranging responsibilities, who is the contact person, who is the person to negotiate with in order to get into licensing agreements. So you see there are many platforms, many opportunities in place. We've learned that also from other opportunities, that patents generated by academic institutions will be brought to national platforms. There's the Enterprise Europe network having such a scheme, having such platforms, and of course there's the Horizon Results platform as well. So there are platforms. It's not that it is obvious that being into an R&I collaboration, that the consortium partners are the ones who bring the assets into the market. Usually also there is a need to involve third parties in the say go-to-market strategy plan. This is an overview about, let's say, about different pillars of IP management in the framework of R&I collaborations, and it's starting with awareness. I mean, actually, I wouldn't underestimate that. I mean, the mindset of the people in R&I collaborations and the level of experience might be quite diverse. You might have really big companies, pharma companies, having, of course, big teams, a lot of experience in IP management. And you have the startup company, you have the young researcher here. And of course, please be aware at the beginning, maybe really try at least really to bring all the players more or less on the same level. Develop common grounds really where you start from. So by having whatever training or having workshops, so that that everybody knows about what to speak about. And then, of course, having a clear picture about the background brought into the collaboration. That should be obvious, but obvious it's not. Obviously, we still see many situations that when it comes later to, let's say, rather in the second half of an R&I collaboration project, to questions related to the further pathways for exploitation, then people say, okay, actually what we do now is pretty much based on some research I've done years ago, so I should have mentioned that as background. And then usually you can go back to the contractual arrangements like a consortium agreement and you can list it until the end of the project. So really, this is not a pure stupid legal exercise. It's really important also for the PIs, for the scientists, for the technology partners really to look at the background and to make a decision that you have all the IP, all the intellectual assets all together which you need in order to leverage from that further. IP assessment, I mean, always, this is a difficult question really to value IP, early stage IP in particular, to make assessment. I mean, of course, there are recommendations, for example, to use metrics, to use databases like Espacenet and so on in order really to get a competitive overview about other IP in place. You can even go for a little bit more extended version into a freedom to operate analysis. I would not expect that for an R&I collaboration, really this should be too cost intensively. But of course, elements of an FTO are important, in particular if you look for commercial applications, and in particular if your collaboration has a higher level of technology readiness level. And at the end, I think this is well covered by my colleagues also, IP protection is a very valid approach in order to really use intellectual assets for value creation. And of course, I think I was mentioning that before, much has to be done at the end in order to get everything robust and ready for further exploitation beyond approach. And this is what, also referring to questions we received so far. So how can I understand actually the whole landscape about a sound knowledge valorization strategy? This is an example I was working on also with a colleague, my colleague Eugene Sweeney. Here you see all those, let's say, intelligence components, like knowing about the market, knowing about competing technology, knowing about other projects, clusters in the field, but knowing also about the value or the importance of standards, norms, and you know there's also another code of practice for standardization recently approved by the Commission, but regulatory affairs. I mean, that differs, of course, from technology sector to technology sector. Regulatory affairs, of course, are very important in the field of biotech, for example, or ICT. And those are all components which you should reflect on in order really to try to understand better what is the value of your intellectual assets developed into the project. And of course, the ways of exploitation, again, usually it's up to the consortium to be discussed, to be among the partners to see what are the most, let's say, valid approaches for bringing, let's say, for exploiting or using results. And this is the full spectrum really, from using results for further research, startup activities, and so on. You see here, and there will even be more to come. I mean, I would say could still be a lot of creativity for business models or innovation models really to leverage from intellectual assets. So just to sum up to some extent, so what are the recommendations actually really to, if you are involved in an R&I collaboration? So definitely it's important to have a robust IP management strategy, which does not only include the protection of IP, but also looking also ahead of further steps of using intellectual assets, for example, for technology upscaling, for licensing, for getting access. And then definitely you need to define, okay, who is the main driver of the innovation? So, and that will also have definitely an impact on with whom you need to share your IP, to define ownership, to protect it, and to exploit it. And again, it's not only protected IP through patents or design rights, it's any kind of IP. And usually business plans or exploitation plans or strategies are based on a bundle of different types of IPs. And I think I definitely stress that the definition of the background from the very beginning and the importance of background brought into the collaboration with the knowledge created during the collaboration and the way forward in order to get it to market actually is the key of success. And that's why also we definitely need to involve relevant partners at the universities like the KTOs, TTOs in that process. Please allow me just 2 minutes in order to address this question, how to balance IP protection and the principles of open science and open innovation, because we really get a lot of questions about that. How does that goes along? Actually, it should be very clear, both principles are compatible to each other. So it's even the contrary. So if you have a well-defined IP management framework, it will definitely an essential tool also to regulate your principles of open science and how to share, with whom to share. For example, what are the typical types of licenses, open licenses procedures for sharing IP with the wider community and stimulate further research, further innovation on that. So really, when you design IP strategies, do not leave that aside or see that at the opposite part. It's part of your IP management strategy. And of course, you need to design and to declare some very pragmatic rules, for example, on publications. But open science does not mean that your IP is unprotected. So for example, publications made through open science, they are still protected by copyright. The data are protected. Databases could be protected, for example, under some conditions by database rights and so on and so on. Even the content of your, let's say, of your publications even could then be, let's say, the technology described here could be protected by patents. So what is important is also that you have some rules established in your framework contract. So for example, there is a rule that dissemination of results or scientific publications of results can only be done after other partners have the agree. And if there is a veto, then it should be postponed. And also you could think about governance structures in your R&I collaboration dealing with specific IP matters, and then you have composed of partners from academia and industry so that you have a balanced approach on that kind of principles. So, really, it is important to understand that all those open access data, innovation, and science principles go along and should be part of your IP management strategies. And we even refer to have a specific strategy on publications in your R&I project. This is a very nice, actually, overview I like. It's been developed also with colleagues in Cambridge University with other colleagues. It really describes what are the main, let's say, the main considerations if you say, okay, is IP a private good or is it a fully public good, and what are the steps in between, when it gets to who is the owner of it, to whom I offer access rights, so I share it, or who has a right to use it commercially. So I think you will get access to the slides as well, so you can really look at that, and that explains very well that there are many steps in between really the proprietary use of IP and to bring it into the public domain. I already managed a couple of things related to ownership. I think this is something really which you should do from the very beginning. You should define the strategies, and you should always have workshops focusing on ownership issues, and at the end there should be a list and a clearly defined rule for that. Having defined ownership, having defined let's say the different roles of the partners involved in the R&I collaboration, also then the point is how to bring the assets closer to market. This should be part of the collaboration agreement. I mean, actually, R&I collaborations could be designed in a way that the get-to-market partners are part of the consortium, but they could also be outside. And of course, then licensing would even be, for example, technology licensing would be very important for that. But sometimes even the package is not really ready for go-to-market, so they need more investments, they need further research in it, and then of course that should also be part of your go-to-market strategy. Appropriate IP evaluation due diligence, I mentioned that before, is a very tricky situation for early stage technologies. So I'm happy to say that from the European IP Help Desk, actually, we offer more and more modules on that. Also in collaboration with partners like the European Patent Office or the Licensing Executive Society, really, because this really you need to develop some skills, actually negotiation skills, knowing about what are, for example, the different dimensions for IP evaluation, the legal dimension, the market, the financing, and so on. So really to understand the home framework, and I'm really referring to that, to additional training modules we already offer, and we will offer more and more even in the future. Cross-licensing might be very important also. There's also a good idea in clustering with other projects in the field to see, is there a chance really to leverage from their IP, to bring them together, and so on. And in particular also, I mentioned to that patent pools, pooling IP, or clearinghouses might also be in particular of value if you intend, for example, we have been talking about compulsory licensing models or IP impact licensing models here. Also, for example, there are new and there's a growing, let's say, portfolio of good practices also in using clearinghouse for impact licensing as well. So before I go also go into, let's say, the very last part in presenting a little bit more about what might be additional sources of information, just to answer to some questions we received in between. Of course, starting an R&I collaboration, that's one question received. Do I already have to know to whom I'm going to license my intellectual assets? Usually not. I mean, when starting a collaboration and you know already, for example, some partners in your networks, then of course you could make them somehow related to the project. I'll give you an example. For example, if you are involved as a European company in an R&I collaboration, or you are involved as an academic institution, and you have some affiliated legal entities, let's say a spin-off company, or let's say you have another branch, and you intend that this branch is the main innovator, the main partner to bring the research outputs closer to market, then you also could start having them being somehow involved as an affiliate entity in the project, or an affiliate entity in the consortium agreements, in the collaboration agreements, so that they can already be involved in some project-related activities, joining, for example, workshops, meetings, being involved in the sharing of ideas, or also in design thinking processes, really to leverage from the intellectual assets for further exploitation. So, I mean, that is definitely one way, but we see in many other R&I collaborations that usually the partners are not known and still even would not be available, or would not be, or let's say the intellectual assets would not be mature enough in order really to address a licensing partner directly after the end of the project. But you can invite them, and in order really to, not just to learn from your intellectual assets, but also to help you, to specify them. And you consider market aspects or specific aspects of consumer, let's say, expectations in the design of research and innovation activities. So that definitely also the intellectual assets are not growing only in terms of technology readiness, but also in terms of user friendliness, of market readiness, of investor readiness. I mean, all these readiness levels are also important, in particular in projects which the technology is, let's say, closer to market. And of course, the question is, for example, for academic partners, another question is, how do I know actually that I will be able to file a patent during the lifetime of the project? Usually you don't know exactly, because of course you need, let's say, professionals in your institution, or lawyers, patent attorneys, who helps you really to make a very clear decision on the patentability of your results. And in most of, at least of the public funding programs, also costs related to these kinds of professional advice is also part of the R&I funding scheme. So of course you should at least consider there is a chance, and you should not plan activities, or let's say forget some activities which might block you or hamper you to use actually the idea and the potential to file a patent, or to register for IP rights. So that's actually the intelligence of the strategy from the very beginning, that you are not, let's say, impeding in any way the likelihood and the chance really to file patents. But of course, you never know exactly, also in particular also when it gets about joint IP, so how that will be made ready for IP protection later on. So last, I would like really to refer you to additional services which are available for you. You know that the European Commission runs a number of IP help desks, or I'm coordinating the European help desk. There are also international help desks. And in particular, when it gets to the point that you would like also to enter into international markets like Southeast Asia, India, China, or Latin America, there are help desks which really answer your questions, and can help you really to define your strategy better. The European Help Desk, European IP Help Desk, has a focus on, of course, European SMEs, European startups, and in particular beneficiaries involved in European funded projects. So whenever you have a question related to IP management in the framework, for example, Horizon 2020 Europe, or an SME being in collaboration with other SMEs in another country, and there are IP-related questions, please get back to us. We have a helpline, so there are nice people waiting for your questions. They will answer the questions at least within 3 days. Usually it's the same day. And in addition to the helpline, we have training schemes. Like, just go on our website, have a look. So I think in the last 15 months, so we welcomed over 10,000 training participants, and 40% of them are really SMEs, startups, but also many researchers. So please go on our website, look at our offers, and register to our training. In addition, there are a number of publications related also to the topic of this training module today about leveraging IP intellectual assets generated in R&I collaborations. And again, have a look at the code of practice. There's really a lot of smart information in it. It can help a lot, also for strategy makers, but also for startups, researchers, to learn from that. Last but not least, there is another new service, which is the Horizon IP Scan, which is particularly relevant for smaller businesses involved in Horizon Europe projects. So also you can learn here from the advice of IP experts in order to design your own IP strategy as an SME being involved in European funded projects. By that, I'm happy to close my training session. And so now you're welcome to take a comfort break, and I'm happy really for your interest, for your attention. And my colleague Miguel from the IPO will keep on in about 15 minutes, and he will have a closer look and provide some insights when it gets to trademarks and design rights. So thank you very much, and have a nice day.